I'm Julia, and I will be performing Prelude in D-flat major by Catherine Rollin.
To your spacious heart and loving hands, dear God, I place my fears, my what-ifs, my spinning world and mind. Comfort with me the truth. No fear is too big for the Great One, who is always with me. I am never alone. Common God, bring courage. Tender Spirit, breathe peace. Gentle Jesus, be close. Amen.
Hello. I am the Reverend Catherine Britton, minister at Sylvan United Church and Camp Pringle, and I am leading today's worship service from the sanctuary of Sylvan United Church. Now, if you've been in our space, you'll know that there are two beautiful pieces of art that are our worship furniture. We have this gorgeous baptism font right in front of me, and over by the window, the communion table. Now, these two were always meant to be part of a trinity. There had always been a hope for a pulpit to add to this. And thanks to the generous donation of a member of our community, the trinity is complete. We have, from the same artist, a pulpit. And I wanted to preach the sermon from this pulpit. I'd always envisioned a crowd of witnesses who were physically present, but we can't do that now. So we will do our best to do it virtually. There are 3 of them. I don't know the order which came first, the table or the font. But it almost seems to me the trinity of Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer. Let us worship God.
The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, as he sat at the front of the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he got up from the entrance of the tent, and he ran and hurried to them, and he bowed down low and he said, "If I have found any favor in the sight of my Lord, do not pass your servant by." let a little water be brought, and you can wash your feet and sit and rest under this tree. Let me bring you some food, and you can be refreshed before you go on your way, now that you've come to your servant." "Very well," said they. "Do as you've said." So he hurried to Sarah. He said, "Quick, find 3 measures of the finest flour and knead it and make some bread." Then he ran to the herd and he selected a young, tender calf, and he gave it to the servant, who hurried to prepare it. Then he found milk and curd, and he put it together with the calf that the servant had prepared, and then he placed it before them. And while they ate, he stood underneath a tree nearby. They said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" He said, "In the tent." One of them said to him, "I will surely return this time next year. And when I do, she will have a son." Well, now, Sarah was in the tent, listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Now, you got to understand, Sarah and Abraham, they were already very old. Sarah was well past childbearing years. So she laughed when she thought, "Now that I am worn out and my Lord here is very old, shall I have this pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I'm telling you that this time next year I will return and she will have a son." Sarah was afraid, and so she lied. She said, "I didn't laugh." And the Lord said, "Yes, you did." But the Lord was gracious to Sarah and did all that he had said. All that he promised her took place. She became pregnant, and she bore a son to Abraham in his old age, just at the very time that he said that she would. Abraham chose the name Isaac for the son that Sarah bore him, and when Isaac was 8 days old, he circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old. Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah 92 when their son Isaac was born to them. Sarah said, "God has given me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Who could have said to Abraham that his Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have given him a son in his old age.
For the next few weeks, the lectionary, the assigned list of readings for each Sunday, will have the stories of Abraham and Sarah. So I thought it would be a good idea to look a little bit more closely at these icons of our faith. Abraham and Sarah are seen as the great ancestors of the faith in Christianity and Judaism and Islam. In fact, these 3 are called the Abrahamic faiths because they trace their stories back to Abraham and Sarah. Now, the book of Genesis, where these stories live in our sacred scripture, is split into 2 parts. There's the prehistory that includes the creation stories, Noah and the ark, and the Tower of Babel. And then there's the ancestor narratives, the stories of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and Joseph and his coat of many colors. Now, there's a lot of biblical scholarship that believes that the ancient stories contained in Genesis were passed along orally for generations. This was a pre-literate culture. Very few people could read or write, and so they told stories. They told stories to pass on wisdom and tradition and faith and education and customs. When King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered the kingdoms of Israel and Judah in 586 BC, he transported the leaders, the brightest and the best of his captured nations, to Babylon. Keep them close, not to lead any revolts in their homeland. And they were expected to assimilate into the culture of the Babylonian Empire, which was very tough for monotheistic cultures like the Israelites. If you already worshipped many gods, few more, no problem, add them into the mix. But if you only had one god, it made it so much more difficult. Think about the story of Daniel in the lion's den, or Daniel and his friends being thrown in the fiery furnace, all because they refused to worship the Babylonian gods. Now, during this time of exile, when the Israelites were trying to hang on to their identity, their culture, their faith, to sing the Lord's song in a strange land, they began to write down some of their ancient stories, including the stories we find in Genesis. And as they did this, they wrote through the lens of understanding who they used to be, who they were now, and how God was with them. Their central questions were, are we still the people of God? After all that has happened, are we still connected to the Israelites of old, with whom God spoke and showed God's faithfulness? Who were we? Who are we now? How did this happen? And how do we understand that God has been with us through it all? These are the central questions that shape the Genesis narrative. Now here's where I want to pause and remind everyone that what I think is the most important thing we should remember about the Bible, if I don't leave you with anything else, at least remember this: the Bible is not history. The Bible is not biography. The Bible is theology. The Bible is the story of how the people understood God and their relationship with God through all the ups and downs of life. It's true, the story of God, but not in our post-industrial revolutionary understanding of truth equaling verifiable facts. The authors of the Bible would not have had any understanding or any value for that. Years ago, I remember hearing the quote, and it's been attributed to many people: "This story is completely true, and some of it actually happened." It's a way of capturing the essence of this concept. This story is absolutely true, and some of it actually happened. So we have to look for the truth in the stories of faith, eternal truths, personal truths, truths about how God is with us no matter what life brings. And these are so much bigger and so much more complex than historically measurable facts. So this is the groundwork in which our reading from Genesis lives. It's an account of Abraham and Sarah, told out loud for centuries before it was written down, to tell us an important truth about how people understand themselves, their circumstances, and our God. And we are invited to find that truth in it for each of us, here, now. It's a story that is sacred to the three major faiths and was written down in response to a time of national crisis, the Babylonian exile, where people were struggling with the question, are we still the people of God? And it's a statement of faith. This is who we are, and this is the God we worship. The stories about Abraham and Sarah are stories of one of the great covenants, promises between God and humans. The promise that God will be our God and we will be God's people. It's a story of trust. Abraham and Sarai were wealthy and established with many family members, many servants, lots of cattle, lots of goods. And God tells them, pick up and go. Go to a place where I will show you. No reason why, No idea where, just go. It's a story of trust, faith in God's directions and decisions. Can you imagine? Can you imagine hearing God to tell you to leave your comfortable, established life, your friends, your home, your job, your familiar surroundings, the streets you walk, the restaurants you go to, the grocery stores you've almost memorized, and just go? Go, but I won't tell you where, and I won't tell you why. Just go. Can you imagine? What kind of faith and trust does that take? Have you ever taken a leap of faith like this before? Gone somewhere new and different, uprooting your family, leaving your friends because you knew it's what you were called to do. And if you were to answer that call here and now, what would be the hardest thing to leave behind? And that's not even the most challenging or outrageous parts of the Abraham and Sarah story. Not only is this a story about a couple who are happy and settled and stable, willing to give up everything to answer God's call to go where I will send you, there's a promise. There's a promise that they will be parents. They will be ancestors of a great nation. Their descendants will be numerous as the stars. The promise comes when they are long past childbearing years. They are of an advanced age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. They don't have any children, and yet here is God promising they will have a son. And in today's story that we heard told by Linnea, Sarah, who is listening in the back, actually laughs out loud. And yet it happens. Not immediately. And Abraham and Sarah try to force it to conform with their expectations and timing, as we know from the story of Hagar and Ishmael we had last week. Abraham and Sarah are not always upstanding citizens. They are terribly human. They make mistakes. And yet, God sticks with them. In strange lands, in their messy humanness, in their petty emotions, in their good times and their bad, God is with them. Sometimes in direct and tangible ways, sometimes in infuriatingly complex and hidden ways. God sticks with them. Back to our question. How do these stories answer the questions for you? Who were we? Who are we now? And what is the nature of how God acts in your life? It's a question that we could be asking as a congregation as we try to learn how to be a church when we can't gather, we can't sing, we can't share food together. It's a question we could be asking ourselves and our families in times of transition. Graduates leaving for post-secondary lives that look like we don't know. Retirement, illness, death, birth, all the transitions of life. What does this story say about God at work in the lives of ordinary people being asked to do extraordinary things? What does it say about how you respond to God in your life? How have you changed how your understanding of God? How have you changed, and how has your understanding of God and faith changed? I'll say that again because I stumbled a bit and it's important. How have you changed in your life? And how has your understanding of God and faith changed in your life? The broken, messy humanness contained in the stories of Abraham and Sarah make it clear that our ancestors were not perfect people. Still, they served God's purposes in many important ways. God's blessings come in the good times when people are doing well, but they also come in the midst of brokenness, of heartbreak. even in a time of exile far from home. The God who creates and blesses and calls us and the creation in which we live very good, sometimes asks us to do big things, hard things, seemingly impossible things. But that God will never abandon us, no matter how hard things get, how well we fulfill God's call or not, how badly we mess up. We have the promise found in the words from Ephesians 3:20 that God working through us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than we can ever ask or imagine. And that is the promise in which Abraham and Sarah trust. And we see it lived out in unimaginable ways. No matter how well we live out God's call or how badly we mess it up, in the promised land, in the times of exile, God is with us. We are not alone. Who are we? Who were we? Who are we now? How did this happen? And how do we understand that God has been with us through it all? And what difference will this make to your life and your faith and your willingness to take a leap of faith into whatever God is dreaming to send you? Thanks be to God. Amen. A reading from Circle of Grace by Jan Richardson. This one's called The Grace That Scorches Us. Here's one thing you must understand about this blessing. It is not for you alone. It is stubborn about this. Do not even try to lay hold of it if you are by yourself, thinking you can carry it on your own. To bear this blessing, you must first take yourself to a place where everyone does not look like you or think like you. A place where they do not believe precisely as you believe, where their thoughts and ideas and gestures are not exact echoes of your own. Bring your sorrow, Bring your grief. Bring your fear. Bring your weariness, your pain, your disgust at how broken the world is, how fractured, how fragmented by its fighting, its wars, its hungers, its penchant for power, its ceaseless repetition of the history it refuses to rise above. I will not tell you this blessing will fix all that. But in this place where you have gathered, wait, watch, listen. Lay aside your inability to be surprised, your resistance to what you do not understand. See then whether this blessing turns to flame on your tongue, sets you to speaking what you cannot fathom, or opens your ear to a language beyond your imagining that comes as a knowing in your bones, a clarity in your heart that tells you this is the reason you were made, for this ache that finally opens us, for this struggle, this grace that scorches us toward one another and into the blazing day. And as you go with this blessing into the blazing day, may God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May God look on you with kindness and bring you peace.